Hello, good evening, everybody. Can all of you hear and see me clearly? If you can, give me a thumbs up in the chat, okay? Hi, good evening, everybody. I am Teacher Mavis, the head of English at Mindstretcher, and today you are here for the Primary 3 and 4 English and A-Star Writing Lab parent briefing. And although we call it a parent briefing, it is a briefing for students as well. So kids, if you're with your parents, that's great, okay? Because whatever I'm sharing with your parents, you should also know so that you can learn and then you can allow your parents to guide and help you as well. Okay? So before we begin, can I just get a sense of my audience here tonight, right? How many of you are in P3 and P4? So if you're in P3, you can type out in the chat P3. If you're in P4, you can tell me you're in P4. Okay, so we get a sense of your level, your level. And for the rest of this evening, for the next 1 hour, please feel free to uh, type your questions in chat, all right, in the chat, webinar chat, or the Q&A, and I will try my best to answer them to the best of my ability. Okay, so I do see quite a number, quite mixed, okay, P3 and P4 students. If you have any burning questions, right, because for P3s, you just started, you were in P2, and now you're in P3. For P4s, you have started doing some components in P3 and now you are getting better at them at P4, okay? Or you are going to get better at them at P4. So if you have any burning questions, you're not so sure about anything with regard to English learning, just ask me in the chat, okay? So like I mentioned, I am Teacher Mavis, and today I'll be taking you through this sharing session. Now, there are a few things we are going to look at today. The first thing is the overview of the assessment objectives at P3 and 4. So of course, if you have older children or older siblings doing PSLE, there will be certain assessment objectives. So by P5 and 6, they should have certain sets, certain skills, okay, for them to tackle the PSLE. But what about at P3 and 4? The next thing we're going to look at would be the key shifts from P2 to P3 and then from P3 to P4. What are the key changes? Okay, so it's better and it's good for you to be aware so that you can be more strategic in trying to fill up any gaps. Okay, what are some challenges, especially in composition and comprehension? Of course, there are many components in the English paper, right? Your grammar, close, vocab MCQ, and so on. But we are going to zoom in a bit on composition and comprehension because over the years, when we talk to parents and students, we realize that these are the components that are most challenging for our students at every level, even at P5 and 6. Okay, so we're going to discuss this. And lastly, how teachers and mind stretcher and parents can work together to support our P3 and 4 students. Okay, and any questions, just please feel free to ask me. Let's take a look at the overview of assessment objectives first, okay, at P3 and 4. So these are all the components or skills that your child will be developing in P3 and 4. Okay, so they are going to be required to do listening, right? Listening quizzes, listening tests. Okay, so what are they expected to be able to listen up for? Everyday conversations. They should be able to listen to a conversation and comprehend what the content is. And by P4, to be able to maybe infer the tone of these speakers and what they're trying to convey, okay, to make connections. So at P3 and 4, some listening questions, you'll see photographs or pictures. There will be some note-taking, right? So these are some things that your child needs to know. So when you do note-taking, for example, you need to know your spelling, right, of these high-frequency words. So these are some things that you have to pay attention to. For speaking, in P1 and 2, they do show and tell, right? Students, you do show and tell. For you to gain confidence standing in front of your class, to talk about something you're really familiar with, like a toy or a favorite book. Now at P3 and 4, they are starting to get exposed to stimulus-based conversation and reading aloud. So they might have done some reading aloud at P1 and 2, but P3 and 4, they are going to be introduced to reading aloud passages. So they have to read a text in a clear and expressive way. And of course, they have to do stimulus-based conversation, right? Where they'll be asked questions and they have to respond without preparation, without any notes. They are supposed to respond to these questions spontaneously. Okay, and as they are responding to these questions, the teachers are also listening out for clear pronunciation, whether the ideas are linked logically or not, whether a listener can follow what you're trying to say. Okay, so that's for speaking. In terms of reading, well, at P1 and 2, the texts are shorter. By P3 and 4, they get lengthier. And the vocabulary gets slightly more complex, okay, more difficult, wider vocabulary. And students, when it comes to comprehension, um, in P3, there are still some questions which are close-ended. You get to tick some options. But by P4, you'll start to realize that there are more inferential questions. Okay, so later on, we are going to dive deeper. Writing, P1 and 2, you're constructing sentences. You might be constructing a few sentences or a short paragraph. But by P3 and 4, you're going to start writing compositions. So what makes up a composition? Not just one paragraph, right? You have several paragraphs. Each paragraph serves a particular purpose. It tells us something that's happening at a certain point in the story arc, okay? So this is the change. Now you're writing a story. And when you're writing a story, you're no longer just writing sentences. Now you start to have a purpose, like this story about bravery. Why am I writing a story about bravery? Am I trying to inspire the reader? Am I trying to create a character that makes the reader want to also be brave? So there are certain purposes we are looking at now, greater intention in writing. Okay? Not just describing a picture, for example. And lastly, in terms of vocab and grammar, this will be important all the way. As long as you're learning English, vocab and grammar are important. Okay? And not just for those components like vocab MCQ or grammar close. Vocab and grammar, they are important for all papers, even in speaking. Okay, so this is something that we have to continue to develop, whether it's grammar, rules, or expanding the vocabulary. Okay, so let's take a look at the shifts, right? So over here we have P2, P3, and P4. So if you're moving from 2 to 3, let's take a look at the skill area, okay, by skill area. So at P2, like I mentioned, construction of sentences, making sure that you can construct sentences that can be understood, that are grammatical. Okay? And as you learn more complex structures, are they still grammatical and accurate? When we are in P3, your teachers will introduce paragraphing to you, all right, in your writing. So when do you start a new paragraph? What are paragraphs for? Okay? And at which do you know that in an introduction, that's a paragraph because it serves that purpose? Okay, so a more structured paragraphing. And then when we move to P4, you start to think about your intention of writing. When we look at purpose and audiences here, I don't necessarily mean the purpose, audience, context in situational writing. Purposes and audience means I'm writing a composition. I have a topic, being brave, and there are three pictures there. Which picture am I picking? Okay, picture one, the picture of a cat, right? Picture of a cat. Bravery, a cat. I want to write a story about someone who saves a cat from a tree. And it's a child who tries to save a cat from a tree. You have to be brave, right, as a child to do that. So, who is my audience? Not just the teacher who is marking my composition, but anyone who reads my story. I want them to enjoy the story. I want them to be engaged in this story about bravery. I want them to be inspired by my main character, the boy. So when we talk about purpose and audience, now as a more mature child, you start to think about, why am I doing this? Why am I writing this? Okay, so that's for writing. And in our writing course, as we progress from P2, 3, and 4, we also start to, in our writing skills worksheets, get students to think about the intention of when they use a certain writing technique or when they create a particular kind of character, setting, or atmosphere. Okay. In terms of reading, like I mentioned again, in the past, for reading comprehension, it was just looking for keywords, right? And then literal questions, making sure that what I see in the passage, it matches my answer. But by P4, we are looking at inferential questions, okay? Being able to understand if the character slammed the door, how is the character feeling? They might not ask you, what did the character do? He slammed the door. Not that much anymore. They might ask you, why did the character slam the door? Or what was the character feeling when he slammed the door? And then the word angry is not anywhere in the text. It is something that the child has to write on his or her own. Okay, that's for reading. In terms of listening, again, more inferential kind of questions. They have to understand the implicit meaning and the speaker's intention through the tone and the kind of words that the speaker is using. For speaking, I mentioned earlier on as well, stimulus-based conversation comes in, and this starts to get a bit challenging for most students, right? Because especially for those who are not used to having conversations using standard English and complete sentences. So when you are having conversations with your children, encourage them to speak or respond to your questions in complete sentences, not just okay. All right. So not just utterances, but complete sentences. And don't just stop there. Encourage them to explain, like, because. So get them to explain and provide examples. Later on, we'll dive deeper when we talk about that again. And then vocabulary and grammar. Basic grammar rules continue to apply, but as they move on to P3, they used to do sentence rearrangement, right? Or sentence manipulation. But by P3 and 4, they start to do some synthesis and transformation. Of course, there are certain schools that start synthesis and transformation at the end of P2. That is possible, simple constructions, but it's more obvious in P3 and 4. So can they look at two sentences and synthesize it without changing the meaning? And in terms of writing as well, do they now know that to create an effect or to get an idea across, there are specific words that will best do that job? So in terms of precision, language control, they'll start to explore that a lot more. All right. So for example, when you're thinking about writing, not just a plain word, but a more specific or vivid word. For example, if someone is walking like, there's wind in his hair, okay? Like a gangster, for example, he's swaggering. We don't just say he's walking, because there are many ways to walk. Okay? So this is just a summary of the key shifts in terms of the skills your child needs to develop over time, okay, over the years. So just a summary. From P3 and 4, mainly your child would not be just looking at, oh, this is correct or wrong, but can I develop an idea? Can I infer? In terms of writing, do I have a structure? Like, do I have an introduction, a rising action, a build up, climax, falling action, conclusion, right? And do these flow? Are there gaps in between? Or are there irrelevant information? Are there pieces of irrelevant information in my story? Okay. In terms of inferences, this is an example I shared just now. If he slammed the door, the question by P4, they will not likely ask, what did he do? But how was he feeling when he slammed the door? Okay. Comprehension, this is an important point. And in primary 1 and 2, when they are asked the question, they will write the answer, and there are extra pieces of information in the answer. The teacher would give them credit still and say, oh, the answer is right. You are looking at the right place. Okay, and this part is right, but you give a bit more. and the teacher may not penalize, right? But by P3 and 4, when we're looking at precision, it's not the longer your answer, the better, but the more relevant your answer, the better. So if you're asked to quote a phrase or you're asked to answer a question, answer the question. Avoid providing extra pieces of information to play safe. So we're not going to play safe by including more information, because what that does is it tells the examiner, I'm not sure. But the examiner wants to test you, right? Are you sure? So we have to be precise, okay? And lastly, language control. Do I know how to vary my sentences? So they'll learn that in synthesis and transformation as well. Okay, and do I know how to use words effectively to communicate what I want to share with my readers so that I meet the purpose of my writing? If there are any questions at this point, please feel free to ask me. Let me check if there's something in the Q&A. Give me a moment. How to get high marks in writing? Okay, when I talk about writing later, we can dive deeper, okay? Okay, so what are some early challenges? If you have been very observant about your child's, when it comes to your child's learning, then you might have observed these things, or your child has told you, like, I find this difficult, or they try to avoid the task, okay, because it's not pleasant to do things that are difficult for you. So it might take them a long time to start writing a composition because they are resisting. It is tough for them. Okay, so some early challenges, especially in composition writing. So a parent asks how to do well in writing. If we can flip all these things you see on the screen, then we are on the right track, right? One issue when it comes to writing, because now they have to write a story, and a story, there are parts to a story compared to just writing some sentences. So when it comes to having to write a story, now there are parts. We have to plan. And not all students think that it's important, and not all students want to spend time doing it because they just want to get and to get over and done with the writing. Okay, so I want to finish this as soon as I can. So they just write. And what happens is very often they get stuck because they realize, oops, my idea doesn't work. Oh, I don't know what else to write. I've only written like 5 sentences. I'm stuck. So we always encourage our students to plan. And in our materials, we provide planning pages, story mountain, okay, to guide them in planning. So if you are giving your child a piece of writing and your child just starts writing, encourage your child to spend 5 to 10 minutes, if they have never done it before, 5 to 10 minutes to plan what's happening at each part of the story, right? And then to ask them to see if it makes sense. Are there any question marks or gaps in between? Okay, is the topic fully addressed and developed by looking at that plan? Another issue would be repetitive ideas. I see that a bit in P5. So I do see some of that. We are starting P5 now. So even at P5, some students might do this, circling the same point. So they build the story, then the climax, and then they start to go back in time again and to talk about something that they might have forgotten to talk about. And then they end up repeating. So that is a problem because they didn't plan. Okay, so they forgot what they wrote just now. They just continue writing. I know a lot of parents would encourage their children to memorize good vocabulary, vivid words and phrases. And no problem, you can do that. But don't just memorize them alone. Like studying a dictionary. No, you don't memorize them alone. You look at how these sentences, how these phrases are used in complete sentences. And you have to see it used in complete sentences in different kinds of stories. Then you will understand how to use it. Because there are many students who, when I mark their composition, I can tell they memorized it and they believe it works here, but doesn't. So when you have a teacher who marks that and they can highlight that, great. Your child will know, oops, I used it wrongly. Okay, and the teacher can provide example how to use it correctly. So when your child is building his or her vocabulary bank, don't just memorize the phrase, but expose him or her to a variety of ways of how this phrase is being used to talk about different things and different people. Okay? So don't just use vivid phrases for the sake of it, because when you do that, your reader will start to get confused. They actually don't know what you're trying to say. And the basic thing of communication is I must understand what you're trying to say. So clarity, grammar, very important, right? If the use of vocabulary blurs meaning, then now we cannot understand you. And if we cannot understand you, we can't appreciate what you're trying to convey. Okay? Weak development. Again, over here at Advanced Literature, we do brainstorming together. We provide students with plot ideas and so on. So later on, I'll show you some sample worksheets. Okay, we provide students with plot ideas and so on, so they can use, and we encourage them to use it, because when they use it, they can see themselves succeeding in creating something that works, and teachers can check if they have applied whatever the teacher has taught correctly. Okay. In comprehension, uh, if your child is an avid reader, okay, I'm not talking about speed of reading. Some children read very quickly, but when I ask them, so what's this story about? They don't know. They haven't really appreciated the story, the characters, the lessons learned, the themes. Okay, they're just reading words on paper, and they're just trying to read as many books as possible. So when children just do surface reading, uh, they don't practice. They don't pause and think. Right? They don't pause and think, oh, this character is interesting. What's this character doing this? They just carry on. So that kind of reading, if they do that in the exam when they're reading a comprehension text, after reading everything, they might still not know what's happening. So that's a common challenge. So they can recognize words, they can read, but they might not be able to comprehend. Okay, so this is one challenge you're looking at. So when your children are reading books, remind them not to rush. And after they read, ask them questions like, what is the most interesting thing in this book? Yeah. Which character? Who is your favorite character in this book? Why? If you could change the ending of this story, what would it be? And when your children can respond to these questions, it means that they have really appreciated the book and they really understood and digested what the book is trying to tell them. Okay, or the story is trying to tell them. Careless errors, this happens even at P6, okay? If they don't check their work. So do you check your work at the end of the paper? I would encourage students to check their work as they are doing their work. So am I spelling my words correctly as I'm spelling the word? Am I using the right tense as I am writing that sentence? Okay, so this is something that you can check if you are looking at their work, or to remind them. Wordiness, this is what I talked about earlier on in terms of length. Okay, so it's not just how many words you write, but is your sentence clear and grammatical? Okay, and does it answer the question? So that's the key. Now we're moving on to what MindStretcher's approach is when it comes to covering these key components and what parents can do to support your child. So when you entrust us with your children, you trust that we have the expertise and skills to support your child. And I know a lot of parents want to know, how can you help and support your child at home? You might not be able to deliver a lesson or to mark his or her work, but what can you realistically do to make sure that whatever your child brings back to the teacher will not contain these errors? Okay, so let's take a look at writing. In our English and A-Star Writing Lab, when it comes to any composition topic, right? They have to unpack. So we make sure that students unpack the requirements, because the moment you don't unpack these things, you start to write out of point, and then you don't do well in your content, you write out of point, right? So unpacking is important. We do that in the classroom. Okay, later on I'll show you some samples. Uh, Another thing we emphasize on will be techniques. Just throwing techniques at the students, but for this composition, in creating this particular kind of character, could be a villain, could be a kind person, what kind of techniques can we use? What kind of vocabulary can we use to best express those ideas? Okay, so we don't teach them just memorize, but at your story plan, based on your story plan, what are some of the vocabulary, words and phrases you can use today? Can you replace some of your simpler, vague words with the phrases you see in the worksheet? So you do that active replacement or switching. Okay? So everything should be meaningful and intentional. It's like when I'm not sure if your child is already starting to use things like a flashback technique. Okay? For example, flashback technique, super popular with students. And when I ask my students, why do you use flashback technique? They said because the teacher told them to. I said, but what's your intention as a writer? As you're moving to P4, you write with purpose audience in your mind. So why are you using flashback technique? Don't know. Okay, so that's usually a response. They do it because someone told them to. Or someone told them that when you use flashback technique, you get higher marks, which is not true. It's not in the rubric. Flashback technique, like all writing techniques, they serve a particular purpose, right? And it only works if it matches your storyline. So, for example, if your child likes using flashback technique, or students, if you like to use this thing called flashback technique, just raise your hand, okay? So I can see if anyone here is a fan of this thing called flashback technique. So, for example, flashback technique, you begin with a scene in this present moment, okay? And then you talk about what happened in the past. If now you're watching a TV program or movie, very often you'll see this ripple effect on the screen, okay? And then this person goes into this memory. So when we use flashback technique, it must be because there is something that's happening in the middle or at the end of the story that would hook the reader, an intense emotion that will make the reader feel curious or concerned for the character. And we're going to use that to hook the reader so that the reader will continue reading what happened to me in the past. Okay? So if a student can tell me his or her intention, I'm like, yeah, that's a good intention and that's the right technique to use. So use it. Okay, so more mindful, meaningful, precision of vocabulary, wide vocabulary, but you see the word here in bold, appropriate. That is extremely important. And this is by the time they reach, even in P3 and 4 rubric, we have it in the PSLE rubric, appropriate and relevant vocabulary. Okay, so it must fit the context. So what can you do when your child brings a piece of marked composition home and then has to do corrections, right? So they have to do their corrections. So you look at your child's work, the teacher's marking, some feedback. What are some things you can do? Firstly, this is something I think the parents can spot. You can definitely spot. So it's, for example, you see very common verbs, dialogue text like said, or walked, or looked. All these are the most basic form of these actions. Are there degrees or are there variations? So if this person is saying something with a very low and loud voice, can you use bellowed, right? Instead of he said, all right, bellowed. If this person is walking with great difficulty, like in mud, can we don't say walk? Can we use trudged? Okay, and we are looking at something, a quick look. Can you don't use look, can you use glance? If you're looking at something very closely, can you say observed closely? Okay, or stared. So parents, you can spot these things and you can ask your child, is there another word you can think of that will bring out the meaning of how this person is doing this action. And then you can look at the worksheet. Are there words and phrases given there that your child can use to replace these basic verbs? Okay, so that's one thing you can do. So we don't want to stress the child out too much. You don't have to swap everything, 20 words. Three first. Three first. Then maybe after that, five. Then maybe after that, eight. Okay, and then your child gets used to that process, right? When I check my work, what am I checking for? Not just errors, but checking to improve. Okay, this is what we can do. The other thing is relevance. So when your child says, Mom, Dad, I want to start writing a composition, okay, and he or she shares his or her idea with you, you look at the picture and you look at the theme or the topic given. Is it linked? Does your child's ideas or story mountain make sense? If there are parts that you go, why is this here? This doesn't talk about bravery. You're talking about side story of this person's past or something about what this person likes to eat. This is not relevant. Then we remind them, okay, that it must be linked to the picture or pictures and the topic. And lastly, this is linked to the first one. But this one is very specific, this emotion. So a very engaging character usually has some strong emotions and transformation. So for example, if you're a very angry character, did your child just say he was angry? Full stop. Or if you see that, then you identify, you just spot that word, circle that word using pencil and say, oh, I see. You say your character is angry. But I cannot tell. I cannot imagine how he looks like or is behaving when he's angry. Is his face red? Does it look like smoke is coming out of his ears? Okay. Is he stomping his feet? Is he pulling his hair in frustration and anger? Exactly is your character doing? Can you use words to paint a picture for me? Okay. So some kids, especially for the younger ones, like to draw. So they'll draw this very angry person. And they say, oh, see, look at his eyebrows. They're this way, right? So describe the facial expression. Describe the arms akimbo, okay? He's not just, his arms are not limp. So encourage your children to do this. They can draw first because some kids are visual learners, and then they can do that. Okay, so these are three things that you can do to support your child in terms of writing. About reading. At my stretch, and I'm sure schools also do some version of this, okay, because these are basic steps your child must take when doing comprehension. I know at P1 and 2, the comprehension passages, the texts are shorter and the questions are simpler. So most students don't do this. But it gets more complex over the years, okay? And then by P6, your child has to look at very demanding comprehension questions. So we want to cultivate the good habit of annotating. Okay, so when you look at a question, don't just quickly flip to the passage and look for the answer. Look at the question. Are the question words like why, what, who? What are the content words? Are we talking about the character's feeling? Are we talking about the character's actions? What are the signal words like only, except, before? These are all important words. And if you miss one, you'll answer the question wrongly. Okay, so this is just to be careful. Mark them out. Okay. And then after analyzing, you look for the information in the text and don't just look, underline it or draw brackets to mark out the answer or clue. I know some students do that, and very often it helps them when they are transferring the answers. They don't miss out. Or they don't waste time re-looking for that spot again in the text, right? They have marked it out, they know where it is. And they put the question number there. So I find that very useful. Okay? And lastly, when you phrase your answers, are they in complete sentences? If they give you 2 lines, it should be in a complete sentences. It should be in complete sentences. So if I say, How was he feeling? And then I gave you 2 lines. Do you just put angry, full stop? Write in a complete sentence using the right sentence stem. He was angry, correct tense as well. Okay, he was angry, full stop. Capital H, ending with a full stop. Okay, so please have high expectations of your child when they're doing that from P3. Okay, don't just let it slide. Say, oh, it's okay, you have the keywords. Okay, fine, your answer is fine. No, don't let it slide, because these become bad habits that will cost them marks when they move on to P5 and 6. Okay, since I'm talking about this penmanship, it's not anywhere in my slide, but penmanship is important. Again, some teachers and parents let it slide. But by P6, I've seen students, I cannot comprehend, I cannot understand handwriting. So how am I supposed to grade them if I don't understand what they're writing? So we don't want that to happen in a crucial year. We want to remind them to practice good handwriting from young. At P1 and 2, because of the grip, okay, they might be still learning how to grip their pencils or pens properly. By P3 and 4, they should start to practice. So if you start to notice that your child's handwriting is not so neat, don't be impatient with them, don't scold them. Give them some time and constant reminders, okay? And get them to write bigger. Some handwriting is really small, bigger. The letter A and D looks different. D's taller, okay? F and T looks different. F has a curve on top. So all these things have to be identified and looked into from P3, okay? Or even younger, even younger. What can you do when it comes to comprehension? Maybe your child has taken some homework home, okay? Whether it's school or mind stretchers. Complete questions, a few questions. So you're looking at your child's worksheet. Are the keywords highlighted? Did they circle the keywords? Did they underline where they find the answer in the text? Okay. And of course, you check that they are using the correct sentence stem. So if they don't begin the answer with a capital letter or a subject, get them to rewrite it in a complete sentence. Okay? So these are some things that you can do. Just visual, just look. If the paper looks very clean, that's not ideal, right? Some students say, I remember what I read. But very often, they don't transfer everything that's necessary. They base it on short-term memory, which is, again, if you're looking at precision, does not work, right? Your answers must contain all the relevant pieces of information. Okay, so do that. Look at your child's paper. Is it clean? It shouldn't be. We have looked at paper 1 and 2, right? We are going to look at another component that gets challenging at P3 and 4, and it is the oral communication component. Like I mentioned earlier on, in reading aloud, they are now going to be reading a text. And depending on the school might start to introduce texts that look like speeches. Because at P5 and 6, at PSLE, they could be given a variety of speeches. Okay, it doesn't always have to be a story. So whatever we are reading, we make sure that we use REAP, R-E-A-P. So what's REAP? REAP would be what the examiner is going to listen out for and what you should pay attention to. So rhythm, stress, and intonation, right? Are you flat and monotonous? Or are you stressing on important words in the story because they are trying to convey a very important idea? Okay? Is there highs and lows in your reading to achieve an effect? Okay, so if your character is excited, then the tone goes up. Okay, and that's linked to the next one, expression, right? Characters have feelings, and as a reader, when you're giving a speech, you also have feelings. So you're supposed to express these feelings through your reading. Articulation and accuracy, again, are your sounds clear or do you mumble? If a word has 4 syllables, do you pronounce or do you articulate all 4 syllables? Right? Determination, 5 syllables. Do you just say determination? Cannot hear clearly, right? Determination, I can hear the D, I can hear the T, I can hear all the syllables, okay? Determination. For example, I say scientist. Do I say scientist? Again, not articulated. Scientist. The T sound at the end. So all these are things that you want to practice, not only in the exam, but when you are listening to your child speak in your daily conversations. Is your child not articulating? If not, practice with your child. Okay? Articulate clearly so that it can be understood. And lastly, pace, right? Not too fast, not too slow. When there's a full stop, pause. When there's comma, a short pause. Between paragraphs, pause for ideas to sink in, okay, to change the scene, to change the setting. So these are things we are looking at when we are looking at reading. Now, for conversation, I mentioned this. A lot of students who are not very confident speakers often respond in one-liners. So, if you ask your child, how was school today? Your child is likely to say, it's okay, full stop. And the conversation is dead right there. So, in order to help our children elaborate, we have to also ask the right questions. We ask open-ended questions. So instead of saying, is school good today? And then they go, yeah, close-ended. You can ask them, what was the funniest thing that happened in school today? They say, oh, my friend cracked a joke in class, and then your child will go on and tell you what the joke was about. Listen, and when your child is able to talk, elaborate, you should be very happy, okay? Because your child is excited, firstly, passionate and excited to share, so there's tone, and your child is able to recount something in words to you. So please don't say, hey, you're talking too much. No, please don't ever say that to your child, okay? Good that you are talking and you're elaborating. You can ask your child if you could change something about today. Maybe your child did a very good day. If you could change something or change a decision you made today, what would it be? Why? And then your child can share. Okay, so we have to ask the right questions and encourage your child to explain and provide examples. And of course, if you find that your child is not speaking complete sentences, encourage him or her. Okay, so this habit is cultivated in daily conversations, not only during exam preparation. Okay, because speaking is a habit, right? Confidence also comes from speaking, being able to share one's opinion confidently. So what's peers? Peers is a framework we use at Mind Stretcher to help our students organize their ideas. So sometimes we have many ideas. And if we don't have a framework, we just say whatever comes to mind first. And we might end up repeating because we forgot what we said. Okay? Or we might just go on and on with no purpose. So parents at work and so on, you have to when your employer or a colleague asks you a question, solve a problem, or to present something, you always have a plan and then you speak presenting based on that plan. You have a framework. So for our children as well, there is a framework to guide their responses. Okay, so you can also use this in fact, this is how people have sustained conversations, right? If somebody were to ask you a question, very often we explain, we share some examples, and we share the most interesting experience related to that question or answer. And then we think, oh, when I think back, this is how I feel. So you reflect. Okay, or if I could change that, this is what I will do. I will recommend a solution. And to close the conversation, you say, yeah, so this is exactly what I think people should do if they want to achieve this. You close your conversation. So in our daily conversations with our friends, our colleagues, we do that too. And we encourage our children to do the same. Okay, so your children can use these as guides, okay, in their daily conversations. So what you can do, I've mentioned this already. You can use reap and peers, but how? Okay, this shouldn't be stressful. Having conversations with your children shouldn't be very stressful for both you and your child. 5 minutes, okay? Read aloud 5 minutes. So just where can you find these things to read? Comprehension passages are great for reading aloud. Storybooks are fine, they have dialogue, right? So storybooks are great for reading aloud, just to get them to practice certain things. And in order not to stress your children out, maybe for today we are going to focus on articulation, or for today we are going to focus on pace because I noticed that you tend to read very fast, okay? So let's focus on pace today. Whenever there's a full stop, I want to hear a pause. So you can do that with your child. 5 minutes reading aloud. In terms of peers, you don't have to say, okay, child, now let's sit down. I'm going to ask you a question, and you're going to use peers to answer my question. Okay, that becomes very stressful. So in your daily conversations during dinner or after dinner when you're sitting around, you're chit-chatting, get them to always share examples, explanations with you. Okay, extend the conversation. And then you, when they ask you questions, please also model that. Show them what it means to explain and give examples. Okay, so when you mirror each other like that, then both of you will become greater conversationalists. Okay, both of you will be able to improve your ability to have a great conversation. And lastly, articulation drill. This is something that um, is important regardless of your level. Uh, in Singapore, we have Singlish. So when we are relaxed, in a very casual setting, we may not articulate. We may not hear the T sounds or the S sounds. Uh, so that may not be our habit, right? In and day out. So when we want to do this, then maybe part of the reading aloud, we can listen to this, okay? Or find opportunities to, when your child is speaking, encourage him or her to be clearer, loud and clear. Okay, loud and clear in his or her pronunciation of words and ending sounds. Okay, so I'm going to pause here for a while. I have about 12 minutes left. Let me see if for P5 and P6 kids. I had a briefing for P5 and P6 children and parents previously. Sweti, could you share that link with parents? Because I believe there are parents here who have older children. In terms of writing improvement, by the time they reach P5 and 6, you can continue to do these three things because there are many P5 and 6 who don't do this. They continue to write in very language. So, Sito, when it comes to writing for P5 and P6, the same things I shared with you, okay? But now their compositions get longer. So when you are going through these, you might have to spend more time. Okay, and I would really encourage P5 and P6 parents to look at the rubric that we attach to your child's work and the feedback we give. Because sometimes it's not just about the marks. You make a small change in your writing, your marks could just go up to the next band. So really look at the rubrics, the PSLE, our rubrics are aligned with what the markers use at PSLE. So look at the rubrics and see where your child is and the teacher's recommendation. If you're not sure, how can your child move a few marks, improve by a few marks and all that? You can always consult the teacher. So always work with our teachers or school teachers. Okay, so I don't think there's a great difference in what you're doing. It's just that now, because it's really close to the exams and they are being marked based on PLE rubrics, that we can pay closer attention to that. Okay, so Sito, my colleague has just, oh, not this, right? This is a writing masterclass. Yes, please also attend for P5 and 6 students or younger students who want to learn. Okay. But Mr. Sito was asking about the briefing I gave to the P5 and P6 parents. Yeah. Okay. So some final reminders before I show you some samples of our worksheets. Okay. Mm, children, if you are here, just some reminders for you. Uh, when you are learning, I'm sure you know what you are better at and what you are not so good at yet. So if you know, please share with your parents and teachers so that they can help you. So your teachers will ask you, when you come from my stretcher, first lesson, they might ask you, oh, so what are you working on? What's not up to your expectation yet? And then you should be able to, oh, I keep making spelling errors, for example, or I keep making careless mistakes in my tenses. Okay, be able to share what you need help with the adults. Okay, the teachers and parents, and then work on them. So if you tend to make tense errors, then when you're checking your composition, zoom in on all the verbs and check are you using the right tense. Okay, zoom in and don't just read and read your composition a few times, just admiring your handwriting. Okay, no, you're reading for specific things. Expand your vocabulary. Every time you don't know a word, circle it, whether it's in school worksheet, my schedule, circle it and ask your teacher or go and find out the meaning, plus how it's used in a sentence. So we give model compositions, we provide word lists with examples, study them, and then construct your own sentences or use them when you're talking to your parents, classmates, teachers, friends. Okay? Practice speaking regularly. This is very important. Okay? If you use the wrong word or make a mistake, so what? What's the big deal? You learn, that's all. Okay? Don't be afraid. When you read books, make sure that you're reading books with good standard English, not books that purposely make spelling errors for fun and entertainment. Because some comic books do that, some books do that because it's funny, right? To change the spelling words. So I don't encourage students or children to do that. Read books with good English, okay? Make sure you do your corrections and don't just say, okay, I'll do it once. Today I put in effort, then for the next 3 months, oh, I don't want to do anything. Okay, so no, you need to be consistent. And what you set out to do must be realistic, right? So you cannot say every day I want to spend 5 hours revising after school. Wow, you'll be so tired. No. Reading aloud, 5 minutes. Conversation over dinner, 15 minutes. Like that. Okay, some writing, 30 minutes. So it must be doable and realistic, okay? So that you won't lose steam. And general reminders, identify your child's weakness, learn words together. So when your child learns a new word, you also try to use it in your speech, okay, when talking to your child. Look at at the teacher's feedback, like I mentioned. Don't just look at marks, because sometimes the marks don't tell us enough, okay? Um, if your child is keeping a journal, that's great. I used to keep a diary all the way to secondary school, okay, where I write what happened that day and so on. No one is checking my grammar in my journal. I'm just writing, sharing my feelings and all that, okay? So that's a good habit to have. And parents don't have to mark their journal. Don't need to, oh, let me read your diary today, and then no, because that kills the joy of writing. The compositions in school marked already. They are learning, okay? Journal writing is something that allows them to express themselves. And as they learn how to spell things correctly and use better grammar in school, they will naturally transfer it to when they're writing their journals. Okay, so let's not read their journals and correct all the errors there, because that's not fun anymore. Okay, encourage mindful rewriting of model compositions. We encourage that as well. We have model compositions. This opening hook is great. But your child didn't use such an opening hook. So for corrections or draft two, can your child adapt it or use it? Yeah. Okay. Or if you want to do some writing practice, but you don't want to write something from scratch, you just want to practice using good techniques, practice yourself spelling things correctly, you can model after the model compositions mindfully. So not rushing, paragraph by paragraph. You don't have to do everything in one day. Okay, so that whatever you are writing, you remember and you appreciate and you learn. And lastly, we are going to have lots of master classes and workshops lined up for the rest of the year. So follow us on Luma. Our events are there and just sign up. Okay, they are free for students. So sign up and take it as part of your diet at My Stretcher. Not something extra, but part of your learning here. Okay, so now if there are any questions, my chat is open, so I'm still looking at it. But I'd like to share some samples of our worksheets. So parents, if you already have looked at your child's worksheets, then you will be familiar with some of the things I'm showing you. Okay. Give me a moment. If there are any questions, please raise them. Um, Okay. I'll share samples of our worksheets, snippets. Okay. If your child was in primary one and two with us, you'll be familiar with Discovery Zone, right? Discovery Zone is this fun every fortnightly they do this Discovery Zone worksheet where they do something fun, okay, with the English language. So let me share with you my screen. Okay, so for example, in P3, okay, this is an example of a Discovery Zone worksheet in week 12. So it is coming soon. Okay, so like, what if you're an influencer? What would you talk about? What will your channel be about? What do you want to share with people as a child? Okay, so something fun like that. It's not tested in the exams and so on. Okay, it's something fun to get them to enjoy the use of the English language. Um, this is something from P3. So I wanted to show you this. So let's say this is a grammar close exercise, but besides being a grammar close exercise, we also expose them to topics that they may or may not be exposed to in school, okay, or in daily conversations. So animation industry, like how does it work, right? And we always provide a study and learn this. So what I mean is here, like prevalent. It was used in the text already, but we give you another example here in a sentence. See how it's being used in sentences. Okay? So we provide this for students. So if you want to learn vocabulary, you can start here. Okay, you can start using our worksheets. This is a sample of a composition at P3. Okay, so pictures are given and we provide this is a model composition. So in the previous week, the students did the composition writing and they were given two plot ideas. So this model composition, we provide two model compositions to show them how using plot one could help them create a story like that, and how using plot two would create another story. And of course, we provide mind stretching vocabulary and phrases. Okay? So when we see copying models, they can do this. They can look at this model, use it for the corrections. Okay? And of course, some reminders on techniques used in these compositions. So this is a model composition. Your children will receive this in week 12. This is a booklet, a compilation of words and phrases with sentences. Okay, so if you want to learn spelling, you want to learn words for composition, writing, you will receive this. Both our English and writing course students receive it. This is a writing lab worksheet, an example. Okay, so sentence writing, okay, interesting sentences, and of course, models to show the use of vivid vocabulary. Like for this one, when we say write with purpose, I want to create a scary atmosphere in my composition. How do you do it? What words do you use? What techniques do you use? So again, we provide models. This is another example. of a writing skills. So this one, they are looking at characterization and plot, right? How to create a character and story idea that creates a conflict that drives the plot. Okay. So for this, for example, they will then receive a model. This is another example looking at atmosphere. Okay. So for the writing course, we dive deeper into certain techniques like creating atmosphere or designing characters, which will then benefit them when they're writing their compositions. Okay, yeah, this is an example of a closed exercise. Comprehension. So comprehension, the teachers will take them through the ALP steps. Okay, and you realize that in our comprehension, we don't just get them to read and do questions. We get them to try challenging questions as well. Okay, and then we share with them certain tips. Like, okay, you read a comprehension. It's about this fish. Can you use some of the things you learn in this comprehension to write more realistic compositions? Yes. So comprehension passages are also models for compositions, especially when they are narratives or even if they are factual. Your child is writing a composition about a particular fish and so on. Can they describe that pet fish vividly? I can use some facts from a factual text here. Okay, so when it comes to learning of language, don't learn it by component. Everything is relevant in every paper. Okay, so this is an example. Um, yeah. So vocabulary. Oh, this I would like to show you. This is P3 comprehension. So you realize that we give them a variety. There are multiple choice questions to check their understanding. We have mixed format questions. Okay. And then again, there are tips for them. So when we do comprehension, we're not just doing it as a test. We are learning the language. We are mastering certain skills outside of comprehension and really just appreciating a text. Okay. Okay. So I think um, that is all. That is all from me tonight. Thank you for staying with me for 3 more minutes. Okay. Are there any other burning questions you'd like to ask at this point? Let me see the Q&A. I've answered those questions. So if there are no questions, please join us for the upcoming master classes. Just stay tuned. Okay. And if there are any other questions, just please feel free to email us. Thank you, Sweti, for sharing the link with everyone. How to apply nice phrases, to learn to apply. So, nice phrases. Uh, if today you learn a good phrase, okay, and you say, I want to use it. Firstly, go and find out how is it used in a variety of sentences. Okay. Then once you see all these examples, you go, oh, this is linked to one of the kind of compositions I'm writing or describe a particular kind of character. Then next time when you're writing that composition, use it. But we often don't learn phrases like that out of nowhere. It usually comes with the composition worksheet. So if it appears in the composition worksheet as part of our vivid words and phrases, then when you are writing the composition, when you're checking your child's work, ask your child, is it possible for you to use this phrase to replace this word in your composition? Because they mean the same thing, but this is more vivid. Okay, so you can do that based on that composition. So I wouldn't think it shouldn't be random, like randomly a phrase pops up. So it's usually there's a context. You're writing a particular kind of composition. There are some phrases that would fit in, and then we see if we can use them correctly. Okay, based on our plan. Okay, if there are no other questions, thank you for joining me tonight. And I hope to see you soon when I do. Thank you and good night. Bye bye. Thank you as well. Thank you.